If
We'll get back to you.
If I remember to ask, I'll ask. But it's just curious that they put it off another year.
Yeah.
Get going.
We're here.
You've been enjoying your conversation.
Okay.
Well, we couldn't hear you. I thought we would.
Good evening. This is Sarah. Can everyone hear us?
Yes.
Online? Okay. I will call the meeting of the North Bethany Service District for Roads to order.
Thank you, Chair Beachy. We'll call it here. So Bruce Young. Yeah, it's on. All right. Bruce Young.
Here.
Commissioner Fye.
I'm here, Kevin. Thank you.
Alicia.
Here.
Commissioner Rogers.
Here.
Dan Reed. You hear us, Dan? Let you on. There you go.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
You're welcome. Commissioner Willie.
Here.
Commissioner Treese.
Here.
Chair Harrington.
Here.
Chair Beachy.
Here.
You have a quorum of 9, Madam Chair.
All right. So I think we're going to have our presentation with any additional budget committee questions after that.
Good evening, Budget Committee. I would like to turn the mic over to our Spanish interpreter, Victor, to give instructions for interpretation this evening, and also want to express appreciation for this service being available to our community. In addition, we do have ASL interpretation available as well. Victor?
Thank you very much. I will start the instructions in Spanish and then I will continue in English as well. Son muy bienvenidos a todos. Tenemos interpretación disponible para esta junta, así que si usted desea escucharlo, si está ingresando por medio de su computadora de escritorio o portátil, va a haber un icono de globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. O si está ingresando por medio de un teléfono inteligente, va a haber unos 3 puntos con las palabras más o more en inglés. Y de ahí va a poder seleccionar la opción de interpretación de idiomas y elegir el idioma de preferencia. Y que si desea escuchar la junta en inglés, puede seleccionar inglés, o si prefiere español, puede seleccionar español. Si tiene alguna pregunta o alguna duda, por favor levante su mano virtual de Zoom y por favor, y así es como puede hacer su pregunta y con mucho gusto le podemos ayudar lo mejor posible. Muchas gracias y muy bienvenidos. Thank you everyone for being present. We have English and Spanish available for this meeting. So if you're joining us through a desktop computer or a laptop computer, there will be an icon with word interpretation underneath. You can, from there, click that option and you can select your language of preference. Similarly, if you're joining through from a mobile device, such as a smartphone or a tablet, there will be 3 dots with the word more, and there will be a new menu where you can select your language interpretation, and from there your language of preference. So if you prefer English, please select English, or Spanish, please select Spanish. If you have any questions at any moment, please raise your virtual hand on Zoom, and that way we can do our best to help you. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. También tenemos diapositivas disponibles en español, así que puede accederlas en el sitio web del condado. Y por favor, puede elegir las opciones de prioridad, presupuesto del condado, y así descargar las diapositivas en español. Also, we have the slides in Spanish. Please go to the county's website where you can also change the language. Go to priority, then budget of the county, and from there you can download the slides in Spanish so you can follow along. Okay, thank you for listening, and back to you.
Thank you very much for that. Okay. Next.
Sorry to interrupt, and I'm also ready to be
Okay. So next we have our, welcome everyone. I think I officially already called us to order, maybe a little too soon. So I guess the next, I'm looking at two different agendas. But we have a refresher on the budget proposed for the district.
It's just going by the slides.
Yeah. So the agenda is up on the screen. For the overall
Yeah.
meeting and
Right.
roll to the next.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure, BG, will read this. Community input will occur toward the end of the meeting, so the public can hear and refer to the presentations and discussed in your budget committee public hearing. 2 minutes per individual and 5 minutes per organization. So once again, community input will be held at the end of the presentation.
Okay.
And Chair, I will turn it back to you.
Okay. So now we are on to the refresher on the budget proposed for the district. Okay.
All right. Well, good evening, Chair Beachy and Budget Committee members. Thank you. I'm Stephen Roberts. I'm the Director of Land Use and Transportation for Washington County. And with me is Sheila Giambroni. She's our Senior Administrative Services Manager for Land Use and Transportation. And we're just going to give you a quick refresher on the budget itself. You heard a more detailed presentation at our previous meeting a couple of weeks ago. So I'll just walk through this fairly quickly and then we can move into some questions and answers if you have any. So just a reminder that the North Bethany County Service District for Roads covers the area of the Bethany or the North Bethany sub area in our Bethany Community Plan. So it's generally north of Springville Road, west of 185th, and then goes north more or less to the Multnomah County line on two sides. The district itself levies a property tax of $1.25 per $1,000 of assessed value on properties within the district. And then those funds are used to design and construct transportation improvements within and adjacent to the North Bethany district. Next slide, please. So this slide is just a quick overview of some of the budget numbers. Sheila's going to give us just a really quick rundown of that.
Okay, so if we add the beginning fund balance and estimated new revenues, which are highlighted in blue on the slide, we estimate the district to have about 18.8 million in resources for fiscal year 23-24. Breaking down the expenditures, you will notice that all funds are budgeted as reflected with a zero ending fund balance. The preponderance of anticipated resources from the district are primarily appropriated as professional services to allow for project flexibility. Other charges include the district's portion of countywide indirect costs, along with staff charges for project management and inspection of the projects being built. Costs for the district's portion of the road fund indirect charges and capital outlay for right-of-way acquisition on our project slated for next full year are also included in the program expenditures.
Okay, next slide. And just really quickly, a few highlights from the budget. We are essentially continuing to manage projects in the district as a pay-as-you-go approach. So we allocate funding as it's available to specific projects and then build those projects once we actually have the funding in hand. The budget proposal this year essentially continues our work on Kaiser Road complete street improvements. Those are in design at this time. And we've allocated about 5.5 million to that future project as a part of the discussion around last year's budget and just continuing that allocation forward. No changes. And then we're also continuing to work on the Springville Phase 4 project from Joss Avenue to the PCC campus entrance. That's also a complete street improvement. And the budget proposal this year allocates an additional $1.2 million for construction of that project. And that is an increase over prior year. We had previously allocated about $12.7 million to that project latest cost estimate based on best information available at this point in the design process is that it will cost about $13.9 million. So that, as Sheila mentioned, the funds are fully appropriated in the budget for this year. Although we anticipate actually constructing both the Kaiser Road and the Springville Road improvements probably in the 2024-2025 timeframe. And I think that's really all we had to share with you tonight for the recap. I did want to note at our last meeting, I apologize for the lateness here. We just finished this up this morning. If you could pass those around, please. We had promised to provide an updated cost, what we call a cost to complete memo. So this was a document that we prepared, I believe initially last year. We've updated that, looking ahead at our best guess about future project costs as we continue building out those projects in the North Bethany Transportation Funding Strategy. And just wanted to make sure to share that information with you. It isn't directly germane to the proposal for the budget, but it's a really good, interesting look ahead tool, and will certainly be useful as we're thinking about future priorities in the district. And I guess with that, we're happy to address any questions. And I do want to note for our committee members who are online, the memo that I'm referring to was included in the agenda, linked in the agenda that's posted online for this meeting tonight on the board agenda page, and has been posted to the budget information page for fiscal year 23-24 as well. And with that, I think we're ready to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roberts. Do we have any questions from the budget committee members online?
I consider them passed.
Okay, Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you. I really don't have any questions about the numbers themselves because they are what they are. I want to say thank you to Steve and your group for bringing forward that memo. We talked about it at the last meeting. It's important, I think, for all of us to understand what the remaining projects are. And Madam Chair, as well as this budget committee, I hope going forward, meaning next year, that there is some robust conversation about what do you do with this issue. Since we formed this particular district, it was somewhat, these are my words, nobody else's. It was, I think, oversubscribed with cost and underfunded. There are not enough funds to do what everybody had in mind. And so I think that as a budget committee, there is some real policy issues. And this isn't the only one. I'm going to make these policy questions out of different ones. But on this one, I think it's incumbent not to come and just look at numbers, but to say, what are we going with this? What sort of money might be necessary to raise? What is the budget committee's perspective? Do we have some long glide pattern? Do you cut projects? What are you going to tell the public? Because you formed, meaning not you necessarily, the board did. And it's pretty obvious that it's going to be a rather long guide pattern to get the improvements that I think people think they're going to get. So I'm just challenging us to, in the next year, to really set our sights on, let's have some real policy issues instead of just matching numbers up. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. Ms. Gruber, do you have a question? Do I see your hand up?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay, sure. With the cost to complete memo, thank you so much for that. That's really helpful to see the estimates. I did have a question of if we knew what confidence level those estimates were at, or kind of what percentage of design we're at, just knowing that costs can continue to grow as we get further and further into design. So I didn't know where we were in kind of the life cycle of those projects.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So I think the Springville Road project, we're feeling pretty good about. It's far enough along in the design process that we think we have a pretty good handle on the scope at this point. I do think the cost escalation just continues to really be a significant factor, and we really don't have a crystal ball to help us understand just what the ongoing magnitude of cost escalation will be. So I wouldn't say that we're completely out of the woods without potentially needing to increase costs for either the Springville or the Kaiser Road, increase our cost estimates again for those, but we feel relatively confident with the numbers that we have at this point. And we have made some assumptions about cost escalation going forward in those estimates too. Thank you. And the other, sorry, that was part of the answer. So the other part of the question, projects that are not yet in the design process, the other projects that have not been completed, those are very much planning level estimates. So they're rough estimates at best.
Mr. Young, you have a question?
Yes. I remember this sort of, I gotta give you an explanation. Back when I first joined the committee several years ago, the JOS to PCC thing was looking at a 2022 start year, and then you guys ran into some planning issues with the bridges that have to go over the creeks that run under the road, which made sense, and they put it off till 2023. However, now we're looking at a 2024 start date. Is this a matter of resources, or it's just, I was curious as to why there's another whole year we slipped that.
That's a good question. I would have to go back and look. I think I don't know that we've pushed this one back. We may have pushed it back a year at some point in the process. I think we had maybe initially hoped to get it out in 23, and now we're looking at 2024. So but yeah, it's not, we're sort of dealing with this across all of our transportation projects. The permitting and design process is just taking longer than it did in the past for a variety of reasons. And so we are finding that it is taking us longer to get projects through what we call the project development pipeline and ready for construction.
Okay, but it's not a resources problem on the other end as far as getting people to actually do the job.
No, sir.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Because I think my recollection is that we had it starting and earlier, and I think maybe the concern there is that as we're pushing things out, inflation and things are causing more things to be more expensive. So when there are delays, that's why we're having to come back in and throw another million into something. Is that kind of follow along with your thinking, Mr. Young?
Yes, probably.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that it seemed, I just wanted to know if there was any thing that they knew for certain that caused the delay, but obviously if it's just a planning, there's no saying no plan of action ever survives contact with the enemy. So, and that's true for across every discipline I've ever worked in. So I suspected that's what it was, but I just wanted to verify that.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for the people online? Okay. Yes, I had just being able to look at the cost to complete late this afternoon. And I sent you guys a quick email like 4:45 today. My follow-up question actually goes in line with Commissioner Rogers' question. If this is our cost to complete estimate as of right now, which is in that 39 to 46 million estimate, what do our funding projections look like? It seems like in the past we might have had some kind of a bar graph or something, or I know there's typically this pie chart of estimated allocations from back in 2011, but obviously times have changed and costs have changed. So what do we think if they're going forward, and it doesn't have to be for tonight, but I think this is something that, as Commissioner Rogers was talking about, we need to look at maybe if we're not going to have, by the time this tax sunsets, having enough money. Oh, a bar graph.
I know.
Yay.
We brought goodies.
Having enough money to complete these projects, and then having to make those decisions down the road.
Right.
Prioritizing projects or
Right.
finding some other raising revenues.
Right. So Mark, do you have that slide? If you could pull that up. Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that, so for those that are online, I've just handed out a hard copy of a chart here that Mark will put up on screen so that you can see it as well. We'll also have this posted on to the agenda page later and the budget page as well. So this was actually this is not an updated document, but this is something that we had initially put together last year, and sort of trying to illustrate the mix of revenues in the district over time. So as you're alluding to, we have a build out process where we're collecting system development charges, transportation development tax, and over time, the amount of property tax generated by the district has grown significantly and is an ongoing revenue stream. So the property district, or the property tax that the district levies does not sunset. It's just designed to continue on, and it could be phased out at some point when it's no longer determined to be needed by the board, but it is an ongoing revenue stream indefinitely. And so that's the blue, the bottom level on that pie chart, if you will. And so what you'll see in that chart is that over time, we had some MSTIP funds, and that's countywide property tax, and that was used for some specific projects as a part of that funding strategy. But that money has been spent, and there won't be more of that funding coming into this district. And you can see that over time, the amount of system development charges and transportation development tax also diminishes. And then we've just projected that stops at a point out in the future. But there would be that continuing ongoing property tax revenue stream, and we're estimating somewhere in the $1.2 to $1.3 million range. And that will vary depending on the growth in assessed value in the properties up in the district over time. But we've tried to make pretty conservative projections about increases over time. So there is that ongoing revenue stream. And so the idea was that ongoing funding mechanism is the way to ensure that we have revenues available at some point in the future to complete projects. The other big unknown, as we've talked about before, I think, is just development. We don't know how much of certain improvements development may construct before the county gets there. So obviously something that's constructed by a developer is not a revenue, is not an expenditure or a funding requirement for the county. So the more that development builds, the less we have an obligation to build over time. And then, as I say, there is that ongoing revenue stream from the property tax itself that would continue to fund projects over the long haul. But I think to your point, and maybe to Commissioner Rogers' point earlier, there will be decisions that have to be made about prioritization. So with any program like this, you have more needs than you have money. And so part of the ongoing work for us will be to continue working with you all to identify what the next priorities are as the funding is available.
Right. And then we're going to have to look at saving up, just as we have extra revenue this year, saving up that money and prioritizing the projects. I mean, there might be a couple of years where we're not allocating for any project while we save.
Right.
Right. Prioritization.
If we continue with a pay-as-you-go approach, and that is the more conservative way to do this, because you do have an ongoing revenue stream, there is a possibility of bonding against some of those future revenues, meaning you can front load some improvements and you pay it off over a longer period of time. That's not a policy discussion that we've had at this point, but that could be an option that could be discussed with the board at some point in the future.
Did you say that the county service district tax brings in 1.2 to 2 million a year? Is that what?
We're guessing in the 1.2 to 1.3 million dollar range, okay, and with a relatively slow growth rate over time, around 3% per year.
Sorry, Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the one statement, but this line of questioning is interesting, and I'll just ask Stephen this question. We know we're running between 8 and 12 to 15% increases in asphalt and various costs, and you're going to get maybe 2-3% increase on your levy. Would it be helpful? Because you already know my prejudice. My prejudice is always to bond, and I know that bonding costs, but it certainly takes the escalation of inflation out. But absent even that, would it be helpful to this group for future use? Because they're pretty smart people looking at the right things to show what the delay in projects might be, because unless the county board, which it appears they're pretty solid on understanding that we're not backfilling with countywide revenues. So if we continue that policy, and I hope we do, then what's it going to look like? Because you've done minor escalators. I think that's kind of what Bruce was getting at, and he said, "Well, are you just taking an inflation rate?" But your inflation rates that I've seen on projects are nowhere near what's happening in the market. So would it be helpful to say, where is that intersection of revenues of 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, whatever it might be, plus some development SDCs, and what the project cost might be, so that these smart, fine people are going to look and say, wow, we're going to not just delay a year or two, we may be 4 or 5 years, unless some generous board in the future, meaning county board, would backfill with one heck of a lot of countywide revenue. So would it be helpful to show them a couple of scenarios so that they understand the significance of this particular issue? It's a big one, and it's a policy issue at some point. So that was my question, Stephen.
Chairman, Commissioner Rogers, it seems like you framed that as a policy question. And I agree with you, but I think it's something that the board needs to talk about and then talk with the budget committee about. Doesn't that make more sense? I mean, we're here to approve this budget for this coming year. And while I agree with you that those are the issues that we're going to be facing, I think that that's something that the board needs to be addressing first. Am I?
Pam, thanks. As usual, you hone down onto a very good synopsis of it. But my take is that the board doesn't quite get to those policies, and if they do, I strongly believe in citizen input, that they should have some input versus us saying, here's what we decided to do. You maneuver the numbers to our wishes. And I understand this is not my district, it's yours. But if I were them, I'd want to have some commentary. So I was just saying, whatever they can do between now and next year's budget, and maybe look at it and chime in, so that as duly appointed members of the budget committee, they might have some input to you as their district commissioner, plus us as a board.
So Commissioner Rogers, I would suggest, this is Chair Harrington, I would suggest that you bring this up at an upcoming board roundtable, please.
I can certainly do that.
Thank you.
And I was thinking that also, usually we have a budget subcommittee meeting that meets separately from the full board. And that would probably be somewhere that we can look through these, we can fine tune and look through these estimates for the future and see where we might be coming up short. And that may be a recommendation that then comes back to the full board for the commissioners to consider, and then come back to our subcommittee. But that seems like that would be the procedure for that. Mr. Young?
Yeah, I just wanted to dovetail on what Commissioner Rogers said. And this points out what I mentioned of the last meeting. At some point, and this chart shows it very succinctly, that we're going to lose everything but tax monies to pay for projects that we need to do. And based on what we're looking at, the price, just the raw estimates of some of these projects are in the 7 figures. Well, we're not going to get 7 figures out of 1.3 every year unless we wait for 5, 6, 7 years. And I don't think any of these projects really need to wait that long, given the fact that if you're looking at how housing has been building here. We're already dealing with traffic issues over here that could be alleviated. For instance, if they could just put through Shackelford to 185th, but that project's huge. And it's not going to be funded at any time by our tax dollars because it's just too big. So I agree with Commissioner Rogers. I think at this point, we're like, based on this chart that you guys gave us, we're like 5 years away from running out of SDC and the other funding forms to cover our projects. So at that point, the only thing other than our taxes, is bonding.
Well, when you know how to create money, let me know, because we have needs all across the county,
I know.
especially on transportation. So
I know that.
I'm just trying to add a little levity to the conversation. That's all.
Right. No, I think those are all good points. And I think we're all looking towards the right, looking towards the future and wondering where, looking where our revenues are going, and that those are the right questions that we should be asking, and that we might need, as a budget committee members, we might need to come back to the county and say, we're going to need help to expedite a certain project, and see what the options would be for something like that. So, and I think that's, like I said, in the past, we've had a subcommittee budget meet and an off budget time. Sometimes it's been in the fall, or earlier in the year. And I know we were trying to get something like that scheduled, but it just didn't kind of work out this year. So, but I think we need to keep this fresh in our minds, and then these concerns, and we need to come back to this and look at this in a little bit more long-term planning, too, because I know we all have priority projects in mind, and we want to help the area. So, but for now, do we have any other questions?
Dan Reed has a question. Dan?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I have two questions, I guess, related to the funding sources and kind of the timing that's involved with those. So we have the SDC and TDT funding that's related to development in the district. So is that funding source based on, are those funds levied when a particular development is as part of the land use process, or is it at the time of permitting for a particular housing unit that goes in? So I guess if we're looking at the development that's maybe in construction right now in Bethany, North Bethany, those funds, have they already been levied for that development, or are they upcoming at some point? Or what's the timing of that?
That's a good question. So those system development charges and the transportation development tax, those are assessed and collected when the building permit is issued. So before construction begins on those projects. In most cases, there are some opportunities to finance those or to pay them at occupancy for multifamily housing, for instance. But generally, those are collected up front. And so buildings that are currently under construction, most likely we have already collected and received that revenue. And so to your point, yeah, we've there's still and we don't have the slide in the presentation tonight, but we think we've still got about 20 to 30% of the total estimated number of units that still have yet to pull a building permit. So that's where we're continuing to show some additional system development charge and transportation development tax revenue over these upcoming few years.
Okay, so it is at permitting, not at the land use stage. Okay.
Correct.
All right, and then I guess my second question is, we've at all these meetings we talk about projects that could potentially be constructed by private development as part of a development project. But that's obviously it's up to the particular developer to themselves out there to build something like that, to build a half street as part of their project or whatever it might be. So, and there are a few things, like I know we've been watching the Shackleford connection for a long time, and think, well, maybe it's going to come in with development, maybe it's not. So at what point, I guess, is there a point where we can say, okay, it doesn't look like it's coming in as part of a private development? Can we look for another avenue or mechanism, as under the county's umbrella to actually get the project done?
You can laugh now.
Yep, that's another excellent question, Dan. So I think the timing of development is one of the big question marks. This sort of ties to the suggestion from Commissioner Rogers and I think Chair Beachy that we should look at future revenues and some scenarios. It's really challenging to know when development may come in and whether they'll build those improvements. So that makes the scenario planning pretty difficult, but I think we could look at a couple of options, like a low development scenario and maybe a higher development scenario, in terms of what the public obligation might be for some of these road improvements over time. And I think that's part of this prioritization question, is that over time we may decide that, well, development doesn't appear to be likely on this particular property within some reasonable time frame, but this improvement seems to be really needed by the community. And that would be a part of our prioritization process. Okay, is there a way for us to fund that improvement ahead of the development going in? So there is sometimes a little bit of a waiting game between the county and the developers. The developers oftentimes might like for us to get in there first and build some of those improvements. And it's obviously advantageous to the county sometimes to let the developers go in first and build certain improvements. And so that is one of the things that sort of makes the idea of projecting ahead a little bit challenging. So that's why it's important that we're checking in every year and looking at what we know right now and then doing our best to project forward.
Do we have any other comments or questions from budget committee members? Okay. Thank you all. All right, so we're going to open it up for community input. We have 2 minutes per individual and 5 minutes per organization. Do we have anyone online?
Well, start. Thank you, Chair Beachy. We'll start if there is anyone in the room that wished to testify the North Bethany County Service District for Roads. I did not see anyone sign in. So would any member viewing this meeting online via Zoom like to provide public comment to North Bethany County Service District for Roads? We'll give you just a moment to utilize the raised hand function. Not seeing any hands, Chair Beachy.
Okay. Thank you for that. So we'll move on to our budget committee action for this evening. Our motion to approve the FY 2023-24 budget for the North Bethany County Service District for Roads as proposed in the amount of $18,833.39 and levy the permanent property tax rate of 1.25 per $1,000 of assessed value. Do we have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Treese. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you all very much for your dedication to this. Our next steps it will go to the full Washington County budget tomorrow on June 1st at 5:30.
June 20th.
Oh, June 20th. Okay. For the board county commissioners for the vote of the whole county budget on June 20th at 10 a.m. So thank you all very much. And I think we will follow up fairly soon about a meeting maybe in the fall.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Meeting adjourned.